Hi there. Today is knife review day, I guess. I haven't done one in about a month, and this is one I've been meaning to do for a while now, so let's just jump right in. This is the CRKT Ripple. This is model number K415KXPC. CRKT, of course, standing for Columbia River Knife and Tool. This particular version of the Ripple is oftentimes referred to as the Walmart edition because that is where it is most commonly found and where it is most commonly purchased. So let me tell you right up front, my short answer on this knife is that it's a great value and this would make a really good EDC for a lot of folks. I do have some issues with it. I'll get into that in a moment, but overall I do like this knife. General price and availability is about $30, and obviously, as this is called the Walmart edition, it is most commonly found at Walmart. So your local Walmart probably has these in stock. If not, walmart.com does. There are a few places online besides Walmart that carry it for about the same price, somewhere between $30 and $40, but really probably the best and most consistent price is going to be Walmart. And it is designed by Ken Onion, if you can't tell by that giant Ken Onion logo. And let's back out, and I'll bring the knife in closer so we can get some close-ups on the blade. You'll see that giant Ken Onion design logo. Not a big fan of really giant graphics or text on knives, and that one's pretty big, but I guess it looks cool enough. And let's take a look at the other side here real quick. You see the CRKT logo, and then the model right there on the blade. And this is made in China, Chinese steel. And I'll set that back down for a second. There are a few variations on the Ripple. This is the only one that I own, but there is a higher end model that has better steel. It has a few color variations. You can also get a combo edge. So this first inch and a half or so is serrated, and then the rest is plain edge like this one you see here. You can get them in blue and in charcoal, and the other variations on this knife cost a little bit more. I think they're more in like the $80 range, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more, but this is going to be probably the most commonly found model out there today because it's so much less expensive. I had received this as a gift from Biking Sean on YouTube a couple months ago, back at the beginning of March. So I've had it for almost 2 months, and I've had a lot of time to carry it. I've carried it off and on throughout the last few weeks here and there just to kind of get a feel for it, see how it feels in my pocket, and obviously how it cuts, its overall performance. And I think the main use for it would be an EDC knife. So that was my goal, was to see how it carries as an EDC knife, and it does get the thumbs up on that. Blade length is 3 1/8 inches. Overall length from one end to the other is about 7.5 inches, and then when closed, you're looking at 4 5/16 inches. I think if you look on CRKT's website, I think they call it 4 1/3 inch on the closed sides. Weight is supposed to be 2.8 ounces, but when I weigh it, I get 2.5, so I think that's actually a little bit more accurate. 2.5 ounces on the weight, which is very light. It's strange. A lot of times you'll have a heavy knife that feels light. This one is almost the opposite to me, and I'm not really sure what it is about the construction or the materials that makes it feel that way, but for some reason this one feels heavier than 2.5 ounces. I don't really know how to explain it, and it's not anything that'll matter for most people. It's just something that I noticed as I was checking it out. The blade steel in here is 8 CR14 MOV. It is not marked on the blade, so there aren't any indications on the blade itself as to what steel is in there, but that is in fact the steel that it uses. And this is my first knife that I've owned that has this steel. I'm used to the 8 CR13 MOV. And this one, just from my several weeks of use, feels about the same. I haven't really sharpened it that much. I'll get into a little bit more of that stuff in a moment. But it seems like a decent steel, and for the price, you're not going to get any super steels ringing in at $30. Blade thickness is 2.5 millimeters, or 1/10 of an inch. Okay, my cat is stealing a rubber band off the table, and off she goes with it. Enjoy. Sorry about that. Blade shape is a drop point, as you can see, and it has this very nicely rounded and smooth spine. So rather than being squared on the back, which I do like on some knives, this one is really smooth and rounded, and it's very comfortable. If you rest your thumb on the back of the blade or your index finger, it just feels great. Not really any traction or grip to speak of, but just super smooth and comfortable. I really like how that was ground. And the blade, the actual grind itself is a hollow grind, and it's pretty high. It slices very well. And I think it's got a really attractive blade design. There's just something about it that's very elegant, and it's very purposeful. It works very well, as it's intended. Handle material is aluminum. It's supposed to be 6061 aluminum, whatever that is. It's often referred to as aircraft aluminum, very commonly used in knives and tools, handle scales, that type of thing. And then the construction is torque screws, and so we have one T8 screw at the pivot. And then holding the body together, we have 4 T6 torque screws. And then we also have 2 of the size T6 holding the pocket clip on. And there's really not a lot of spaces where it's held together, and it's very solidly built, so it's very elegantly and nicely done. And then you can see we've got a couple of those little standoffs or pillars, and it is an open back design. And it is skeletonized. I don't know if it's going to come out in this light. Yeah, you can kind of see it there. You can see that there's some holes that have been milled out there on the inside of the liners. These are nested steel liners, by the way. So there's some holes milled out there, and then liner side. You can kind of see these holes as I hold it up against the background. All these little holes along the edges. Those are just for the design, just for the aesthetics, and maybe to lighten it a little bit. And those run through the liners as well. So those are drilled all the way through, obviously, as you can see right through. It does have some pretty aggressive texturing on the outside, and it's called pocket worn. So it arrives to you. If you can kind of see how some parts look brushed or worn off, that's how it comes from the factory, which I think is kind of cool in a way, because then when you get the knife and you carry it for a while, it still pretty much looks just as good as when you first got it. So I thought that was kind of slick. It's also a little bit sneaky. Maybe they don't have to be quite as careful with this model at the factory. They can kind of toss them around a little bit and you'll never notice because it's purposely worn. And that texturing that you see there, that wavy pattern, along with these kind of like ribs or veins that run from one end to the other, they really give you a lot of traction and holds your thumb and your fingers in place very well. As you can see, it does have jimping, and it's got some nice wide jimping at the top, of course, of both the blade and the handle. And then it's got a little bit in the finger groove or on the liner there, and then also, as you can see, on the flipper. And I don't think it was really necessary on the flipper. The way that you flip it, it doesn't seem like you need to really catch up so high, because you kind of just push on the back end. But for whatever reason, they decided to put a few of those little serrations there, and I suppose they're effective. I suppose it helps to hold your hand in place. I don't really get the big deal with jimping. It doesn't really mean a whole lot to me. But it's there if you like it. It's comfortable. When I hold it in my hand, the thing that I don't like is that when I'm using it for an extended period of time, if I'm making several cuts, that little, that raised part at the end of the clip, that little lip there, just kind of pushes into my hand, just a little bit in the palm of my hand. And I don't know. I think it's just going to depend on the size of your hand and where you hold the knife, but for me it just kind of sits in one spot where it just bugs me a little bit. So something to be aware of if you're deciding whether or not to buy this knife. For me, it's not really a deal breaker, but it could be more comfortable. I don't know if maybe they made the clip longer, or if it was positioned more into the center of the handle. Maybe that might have improved things. I couldn't really say for sure, but I didn't really like the way that it feels against my hand. The other thing that I thought could have been a little bit better, and this is just a personal preference, but I'm not really the biggest fan of thumb ramps. When they put that little raised ramp at the back of the knife, it's kind of like the designer or the manufacturer is telling me where to put my thumb, and if it was smooth and went straight across, my thumb would sit up higher. Like, my preference with most knives would be to put my thumb further up the blade spine, but it always tends to land right where the peak of the thumb ramp is. So when I go to set my thumb there, it's not painful by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a little bit uncomfortable. So the thumb ramp's a little bit farther back than I would like. And again, that's not a big deal. It's not going to bug most people, but it is worth mentioning, I think. We do have a lanyard hole, and it fits 550 paracord just fine. Plenty of room for that. So that might be a good choice. If this was something I was going to carry commonly, very often, I might actually consider, putting it in my pocket, removing the clip, and just hanging a nice long lanyard on it. So that's a nice option. Now, of course, as mentioned, we do have a pocket clip. Unfortunately, it is single side, single position. So it is right hand, and it is tip down only. No tip up, and nothing for you lefties. So that was unfortunate, missed opportunity. I think that they could have done a little bit something. If nothing else, I think that they should have at least offered tip up. And I do actually have a reason for that. I've carried this a few times, and it only happened once, but I didn't like it that it happened the one time. And the little flipper, and this has never happened with another knife, and while this knife has a very strong detent, it did happen to me that the flipper pushed against my pocket and opened the knife a tiny bit in my pocket, about like that. And when I went to reach out of my pocket, I could kind of feel that the blade was already, loose. It had already been pushed open a fraction. And I typically carry with tip up, and I don't think it would have happened. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty confident it wouldn't happen if I was able to flip the clip around to the other side. No big deal. Definitely not a deal breaker. And again, out of 2 months of carrying it off and on, it only happened the one time. So nothing to panic over, but it's just one more little quirk about it that I didn't really care for. It does sit pretty low in your pocket though. Only about a half an inch or a little bit over a half an inch will stick out above the edge of your pocket. So that's not too bad. And I think that's pretty common with most knives in this size range, 3 to 4 inches thereabouts. Overall balance is good. From front to back it feels pretty good. It's a little bit handle heavy, but I mean that's to be expected with the aluminum scales. But overall it feels very nice. It doesn't feel like it's completely imbalanced from one end to the other. And the opening mechanism, as you can see, is a flipper. No thumb studs, no blade stops. So it's just that single flipper is the only thing. There's obviously no nail nick or or thumb disc or anything like that. Could they have added one? I'm sure they could have. They probably would have had to change the design of the handle. It wouldn't have been as it is. If you put a thumb stud in there, you're probably not going to be able to reach it anyway. So Ken just strictly went with the flipper, and it works very, very well. The pivot smoothness when you're flipping open is excellent. It's snug, so you can kind of see if depending on how hard you push the flipper, it's not going to jump all the way open. But it does have that IKBS ball bearing system, so when you do give it a little bit of force, it just leaps right out. It almost feels, when you give it a nice good push, it almost feels like an assisted opener, because once it gets a little bit of momentum going, it just jumps. Blade centering is really, really nice. Mine is almost perfectly centered, or even, I might even go so far as to say it is perfectly centered. And for a liner lock and for a knife in this price range, that was kind of cool. I can't guarantee that yours will be perfectly centered, but that was just something to notice. Thank you. It's my cat sneezing. I don't know what it is when I make knife reviews or any kind of review. My cats come out in full force. So like as soon as I turn the camera on and start talking about something, even though they've left me alone for hours, they just all swarm and hang out at the table and like make a bunch of noise and obviously sneeze or whatever they're doing off to the side. So sorry, but that's the life of a cat owner. Okay, getting back to the knife. Blade centering is excellent. Lock type is a liner lock, as I've mentioned before, and there is no play in any direction. So on mine, the lockup is what most people consider to be late. It's another little something about knives that I don't really care about. It's never mattered to me. And I've had knives that I bought them from the factory with a quote-unquote late lockup, and years later after lots of use, it's in the exact same position. So I'm not really convinced that it makes much difference significantly one way or the other. But I will say that there's just completely solid lockup. There's no wobble or wiggle in any direction, which is excellent. And the overall strength seems very high. It seems like this is a knife that's going to last you for years, and I have every confidence in the lock, the blade, and the handle. So there's no cheap or gimmicky parts. The clip is held on very well, very grippy, nice thick stock. The metal on all parts is I think of decent thickness. The liner's a little thin, but I still think for this type of knife and its function, I think it's going to be more than enough. Factory edge was extremely sharp. and I haven't had enough time with the knife to really get into it and use it crazy and sharpen up a ton of times. I've only lightly stropped it twice, maybe 3 times, so I can't really speak on how long it holds an edge with that 8CR14 MOV, but it was expertly sharpened from the factory. And the only issue that I could have with it, and it's really none, is that the edge bevels aren't completely symmetrical from one side to the other. They're a little bit thinner here on one side, a little bit thicker there on the other side, but no biggie. For a knife in this price range, you can't ask for anything more. I do like the overall looks of the knife. I think that it's a very elegant design. I think that it would make a good choice for a gentleman's knife, as people like to say. It's got kind of an elegant, classy sort of look to it, and I rather like that. Fit and finish, a little rough here and there, but again, this is all in line with the price, and I think for the price, I think it's very well done. So I'll give you a quick rundown on my pros and cons, kind of just an overall thing, and I'm going to try and wrap this up as quick as possible. I do like the looks. I think it cuts very well. It's very light. It's slim, so it sits very flat in your pocket. It opens quickly. It's got a good size lanyard hole. If anything, I would probably consider taking off the pocket clip and just carrying it with a lanyard hole. And if you are already thinking about that, then this definitely gets a green light from me, and I don't have besides that pocket clip, I have very few other complaints. I should mention real quick, now that I'm getting to my pros, let's get into the cons real quick, that pocket clip can be uncomfortable when you hold it, and the other thing is when it sits down in your pocket, I don't know how to explain it, it kind of has this tendency to want to kind of twist forward, and I think that motion, if you kind of imagine looking at that from the top down, if that's sitting up against the edge of your pocket, it kind of wants to turn towards the crease of your pocket. And I think that's when that flipper starts to want to rub against the edge of the pocket and then push the blade open. So maybe that's what caused that. So that's really that, what I consider to be unnecessary thumb ramp. Those are my 2 biggest complaints, and they're minor. They're not really major. And and it's not really a complaint, but a suggestion. I would have liked to have seen a G10 model with just smooth, lightly textured G10 on both sides with those same nested liners. And then maybe add a 4-way clip. I think that could really open up some avenues as far as catching more customers, especially left-handed customers who want to clip it to their left-hand pocket. So those are pretty much both my pros and cons. I've used it for everyday tasks, no hard use. I haven't chopped down any trees or batoned with it. I don't baton with any folding knives. But I haven't really done anything that people would consider to be heavy duty. I think CRKT has kind of come up in the last few years. I think for a long time they were sort of resting on their laurels, so to speak. They would kind of have their M16 line, and they had a lot of weird novelty or gimmicky kind of knives, and it seems like lately they're starting to kind of make an impact in the knife industry again. They'd kind of slipped away, and CRKT starts to get mentioned with some of the less popular big name brands like SOG and some of the other guys. But I think CRKT seems to be making an honest effort to grab some good designers, bring back some good designs, and kind of make a name for themselves again. And I think it's working, and I think this knife will kind of help them to do that. And let's look at some knives really quick. And again, I'm sorry this is another long review. Can't help it. I start talking about knives, I just want to go on and on. But I'll back out a little bit and I'll bring some other knives in that I think compare to the Ken Onion Ripple. Maybe not exactly, but fall into this similar arena. One knife would be the Kershaw Leek, which of course is also designed by Ken Onion. And you can see it's a little bit shorter, but the big thing with Ken Onion, he's got these very flowing organic designs, and the Leek falls right into that same genre of knife. It's got this really smooth, organic, sweeping line kind of thing. I find this knife to be a little more comfortable. I almost cut myself there, that would have been fun. I find it to be a little bit more comfortable. It's a little bit slimmer, as you can see. Let me put them up side by side. But I like that on the Leek, even though it doesn't have left-hand positions, you can change it to tip up. I don't know why mine isn't tip up still, but I usually switch them all to tip up. But I do like that about the Leek. Compared between the two blade shapes, it's kind of a toss-up because I really like this almost Warncliffe design of the Leek, but I really like this excellent drop point of the Ripple. speaking of SOG, since I was talking about them before, and just this is really more for a size comparison. Again, this falls into the same small, gentlemanly type folder, but we're talking even smaller now. It would be the SOG Twitch 2, but it does have aluminum scales, and I believe this one was AUS 8. Forgive me if I'm saying that one wrong. I think it's AUS 8. But that puts it, you know, overall wear and edge retention and sharpness about the same. And that kind of gives you some idea of the size. A little bit smaller, still a little bit narrower. And then this next one that I'm going to bring in, this will just be for a size comparison. They're not really in the same realm as one another, but the Spyderco Tenacious, forgive me, mine's completely dirty because that's my main work knife. But that'll give you some idea of size if you already have a Tenacious. I think the Tenacious is 4 ounces, if I'm not mistaken. So this one being 2.5 ounces, this one being 4 ounces, much heavier knife. A little bit longer of a blade. Obviously it's much wider. But another size comparison since so many people have the Tenacious. Now I'm going to put these other ones away, and then I'll bring in the one knife that I really think is a fairly good direct comparison to the CRKT Ripple, and that would be the Kershaw Skyline. And between these two, for me personally, I like the Skyline better. You can see, you know, overall size, the handles, somewhat the shape, because if you consider they both have that little, let me pull in a little bit closer here. If you consider that they both have the little finger groove, or, you know, choil area, whatever you want to call this section right here, they're fairly similar. You know, how far the flipper sticks out is pretty similar. Blade length, very similar. The grinds are a little bit different, but overall I think these really fill the same role. And again, while the Skyline is not set up for left-handed carry, and I don't know why companies don't do that. I'm not left-handed, but it just, I'd be bummed if I was, because I miss out on so many knives, or I have to relegate them to my back pocket or my right pocket, or just carry them funny. But it does, again, it has a tip-up configuration, whereas the Ripple does not. I also like the G10, and I actually like the G10 a little bit better than the aluminum. The aluminum right here is a little bit busy, and while the texture works very well and it is grippy, there's a lot going on, and just comfort-wise, the plain, lightly textured G10 is a lot more comfortable to me. And I also like, as I mentioned before, now a lot of people, I've seen some other reviews of the Skyline, which I don't think I've done one, maybe I will soon. I've seen a lot of reviews of the Skyline, and people complain about no thumb ramp or no jimping. That's what I like about it, because I can kind of slide my thumb up wherever I want along the blade, and it's not predetermined to me by jimping or by a thumb ramp where that thumb needs to go. It's not. I'm not going to slip so far up I'm going to fly off the knife. It's just never going to happen, which is another reason why I'm not so particular about jimping for an everyday knife, for an EDC knife. I just love the smooth back of the Skyline. So anyway, between those two, I would choose the Skyline. But if you like the materials that are used in the Ripple, if you like the design of it, and if you want something, you know, this between the two, I think the Ripple's a little bit more gentlemanly looking. You know, maybe the Skyline's a little less classy looking. So if you like the overall design, if you like the materials that are in it, and if you don't mind, or you think you'd be comfortable with some of the issues that I had with it, if you don't think those are going to be very pressing for you, then by all means buy it for $30. It's just a dynamite value, and I think that it's really, really hard to beat. And the fact that you can just pick it up in any old Walmart is a bonus. So there you have it, my review of the CRKT Ripple by Ken Onion. And I think this might be my longest review yet, and I'm sorry about that. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.